Very short commercial break. The show for today, the topic is the Methodist Church and higher education, and we're talking to Dr. Cynthia Hobson from Nashville as an administrator at the Board of Higher Education. Is that right, Doctor? At the Board of Higher Education of the United Methodist Church, even though what we'd like to talk about now is the church before it became the United Methodist Church and higher education. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, put great store on having an educated clergy, and he thought education was something that should be available to all people for the public good, because he felt like if people had an education, they could make better choices, and certainly he was right about that. And so the Methodist Church from its very beginning has been involved in higher education and trying to empower people to make their own choices and do the right thing as far as making a living and getting a good education. So the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry of the United Methodist Church is just that brick and mortar place that kind of helps institutions. We have 122 schools, colleges, and universities that are all across the country, and we have some that are related to us around the world. So we'll be having a joint conference of the National Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities, plus the International Association later on this year. So we're excited about what the Methodist Church does around the world to make people's lives better through empowering them with higher education.
And so the church has long been involved in higher education, and it's nothing new to Methodists. But now, in a real sense of, what are some of the challenges that you know, and I think that you mentioned that this board is going to have to meet. What will be some of the issues that you'll probably deal with at this conference of all of the members of churches, various institutions?
They'll be looking at higher education around the world, of course, but then they'll be looking at poverty and civil rights. I think John Siegenthaler is scheduled to speak to the youth, and Dr. James Laney, who is the former president at Emory University. So we've got people coming from around the world who will talk about the issues in their particular areas and how they will relate to where we are today as we try to move people forward. One of our challenges with higher education these days, especially with our denomination, is helping local church people understand that it's important that they invest in the lives of young people, and certainly second career people, but especially young people, and help them discern what their talents and gifts are as maybe an offering for ministry. Because like I said, John Wesley put great store on having an educated clergy, and we do try to support people who are going into the ministry and helping people find what it is they're called to do, because it's easy for folk to do what they've been called to do when they have been empowered and supported all along the way. So that's where we are with that.
And so you're following on a long tradition of higher education in the church. It was nothing.
Absolutely.
This even started long before the end of slavery in terms of the Methodist Church itself. They were involved in it, and now and so what are some of the things that you believe would help to enhance the higher education within the church itself?
I don't think we talk enough about higher education in the local churches, because I think we take what happens down the street at the colleges for granted. We don't quite always build the bridge from place A to place B. And one of the challenges continues to be helping people find that something, as I mentioned before, that calling that they have, and then being empowered to be trained to do a good job at that. We have clergy who will be retiring in great numbers in the next few years, and finding people to replace them. We've had challenges finding young people under 35 to go into ministry. And of course, as they start to do their education, those high debt loads are a real problem for people. And so sometimes they don't see ministry as an opportunity because they have to go and earn a living because they've got to pay their student loans. And that's a real problem.
And so it's a real issue. And I think, see, when I was associated as a practice preacher in a real sense, and a learning preacher for 7 years on the circuit down in Lincoln County. One of the real problems that we had at that particular time was making sure that pastors were adequately compensated. Is that still one of the challenges that they have in the United Methodist Church?
Yes, it is.
Dealing with pastors. Speak to that.
Well, you have a lot of pastors, and you hear about the mega churches where the preachers make lots and lots of money, but the average preacher does not get rich in the ministry. And I don't think the average person goes into ministry to make money. They go into it because they feel like they have something to offer, and God has called them to do ministry in all kinds of settings. We have chaplains and people who serve in prisons and in the military and things like that. So once they can ever find that niche, that place where they find their greatest calling, then I think they I don't want to say throw money to the wind because they do have to support their families, but they do understand that there is satisfaction that comes from doing a good job in submission to what God has called them to do. But most salaries are not nearly as good because if the average person goes into seminary and spends 3 years, and it takes 3 years to complete a seminary degree, they're not going to make the kind of money that a student who goes to med school or goes to law school or any other kind of professional school, they're not going to make that kind of money for a long, long time. And so it's something that people have to think about, I guess, if they're concerned about their debt load and things like that, and they can't afford not to be today, especially with the economy being the way it is.
I know the church has special efforts that they try to increase the salaries of ministers and not only increase the salaries of ministers, but also to provide scholarships and whatnot so that they might be able to perhaps attend an institution of higher education to get an advanced degree. Do you find that to be adequately supported in terms of the church itself?
Well, today it's in pretty good shape. We have the Ministerial Education Fund that supports the seminaries and annual conferences so that they can support ministers as they're trying to go to a seminary and get the training that they need. So we have an Office of Loans and Scholarships too that also helps students to be supported as they go along.
But now you also have a real interest in a special fund, and that's the Black College Fund that we want to talk about during the last part of this show for today. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The topic today is the